Last time we saw a famous scientist, Denis Noble, asserting that the neo-Darwinian theory of evolution, which is also known as the modern synthesis of evolution, is totally disproved. This theory has been touted as not just a theory but a fact of science for decades. Devotees, like Richard Dawkins, have poured scorn on anyone doubting this sacred theory. They're just ignorant fools. But with a few other renegades, Noble founded a group called the Third Way of Evolution, in which just about the whole of the current story is abandoned. The group claim that a genuine theory of biology does not yet exist. I agree wholeheartedly with that conclusion. The astounding complexity of life and the utter impossibility of arriving at life of any kind by random chance events makes the existence of an intelligent creator obvious. Even the brilliant atheist Fred Hoyle was brought by his research in several fields of science to the conclusion that a super-intellect has monkeyed with physics as well as with chemistry and biology. A little later, he came to the conclusion that the creation of the universe, like the solution of the Rubik cube, requires an intelligence. Hoyle was cancelled, thrown out, maligned and shunned. But Noble has not been rejected. Why not? He has specifically distanced himself from any kind of non-material explanation.
See, Descartes was a dualist. He dealt with the problem of the mechanics of an organism by saying there must be a spiritual entity that interacts with the mechanics. This was Cartesian dualism. And in a sense, the dualism of the replicator being in communication with and conducting the vehicle is a resurrection of the same kind of problem. We don't need a dualism. The agency of organisms comes from within us. It doesn't come from some ghostly outside.
He points to René Descartes and his idea of dualism, man being partly mechanism and partly immaterial soul or spirit. Noble rejects any such dualism.
So what we're talking about is, can there be innovation? Can there be creativity? That's the key question. Now, the Darwinian, or rather the neo-Darwinian answer to that is, well, there is chance, there is stochasticity, but it's not used. It is just simply determining how many breakages, how many changes occur naturally in the genome. And then natural selection comes along and automatically works out which are successful and which are not. Now, I just reverse that by saying that in addition to that process, organisms can actually go and use the chance. And they're doing that all the time. See, the way our immune systems work shows that. The answer, therefore, I think, to the question, are we creative? First of all, it's obvious we are. How do you get a Beethoven? How do you get an Einstein if we're not? But the question is, can physiologists explain that? And I think they can. If you can bring that stochastic process under some kind of control, you then do the selecting, then you can end up with creativity.
Noble claims that man is purely material and life is a necessary result of processes and choices within ourselves. His view of evolution is materialistic and esoteric at the same time. Now, that struck me as very strange until I discovered his Buddhist connections.
I decided when I finished writing this book to use a particular Buddhist parable, the ox herder parable, which attempts to explain pictorially what is meant by the no self concept. Anyway, that's by way of background to how I got involved in all of this. When The Music of Life was published, quite soon after, I was invited all over the world to talk to groups involved in Buddhist thought, or to groups of Buddhist monks, including a huge congress held in Thailand, which must have been the biggest organization of Buddhist monks I've ever seen in one place, and 2 dialogues or debates, or whatever you want to call them, with His Holiness the Dalai Lama.
I'm confident that if he'd referred to the Archbishop of Canterbury or the leader of the Orthodox Church as His Holiness, he would have been cancelled immediately. But the Dalai Lama is on the perfectly acceptable list. The slides he used in a recent internet lecture to Buddhists in America give some insight into his beliefs. Biological relativity in interaction with leading Buddhist monks in South Korea. Biological relativity in the work of Won Ho. Won Ho's commentary on the Diamond Sutra. Translation of Won Ho's classical Chinese. Talk on Won Ho at Silsang Sa, Korea. Noble is convinced that life and consciousness are results of our being able to purposefully harness random or stochastic events. To justify this, he points to the human immune system, which uses a random search procedure when facing pathogens it has not met before. Our immune system is a marvel of ingenuity and brilliant design. An army of several different types of white blood cells roam around our bodies, moving from cell to cell. Each cell has many immune system components that sample the proteins being produced in the cell and from the neighbourhood of the cell. If there are hidden viruses or bacteria lurking, they would be made of proteins not supposed to be there. Cells present samples of suspicious proteins to the patrolling T cells using special antigen-presenting cells. The T cells check them for known pathogens which can be killed by existing antibodies, which are recorded in their antibody library. But if it comes from an unknown pathogen, signals are sent to the immune system which organise a strategy to fight the invader. When needed, a signal is sent to the nucleus to stimulate specific genes to produce protein sequences relevant to the target pathogen in random combinations. T cells carry the products of these random combinations to the thymus gland, where they're assessed for effectiveness against the invader. If they're not very effective, they're destroyed and recycled. Those which are effective are held for comparison with other combinations. After rigorous testing and selection, the most effective is retained, replicated, and sent into action against the invader, while the less successful are destroyed and recycled. This is the only process in the body known to use random search procedures. Noble makes a big thing of this random search capability and claims that it changes the genes in the DNA which can be passed on in the germline, the genes passed on to the next generation. This doesn't appear to be borne out by observation, as we'll see next time. But Noble confidently claims that changes can be passed on because some creatures supposed to be in lines of evolutionary descent have what appear to be blocks of genetic code added to those of supposed earlier creatures in that line of descent. That might be convincing to a dedicated evolutionist, but such a thing has not actually been observed to happen. And as far as I know, no plausible mechanism has been proposed of how it could happen. It appears to be only speculation based on wishful thinking. But spurred on by his conviction that the random processes used by the immune system can produce miracles in the DNA, Noble is confident that all the body needs to produce life and consciousness is enough random processes.
Descartes' mistake was to suppose there's a kind of other entity, non-material, a soul, a spirit, whatever you want to call it, that interacts with the mechanics, as it were. The big question is, how can you get creativity without having to have something up there that injects it into you? You know that lovely painting of the fingers pointing, you see, and Adam gets, as it were, activated by the finger of God. We don't need that because the organism has that ability already. The reason is simply because it can use the chance events that occur in its molecular mechanisms. There's where the creativity comes from. The way I think to think about this is that once you can harness chance, use it, you have the possibility of creating novelty, and that's what we're doing. Isn't that what we call creativity? You see, before a Beethoven emerges, we couldn't have predicted. I don't think musicians before Beethoven would have predicted what he did. And Einstein did the same with physics, fundamental physics. I think what those people were doing was to find the chance processes within themselves, seeing it and then saying, oh, I want to go that way. That's going to shock the world. But the process, I think, is within ourselves, and it's based on the fact that we are not determinate like computers with silicon chips that are rigid. What happens in water? The molecules are moving around all the time. It's Brownian motion, which we've known about ever since about 1830.
He's convinced that since our cells are in a body largely made of water, which must allow random Brownian motion, its jiggling can explain just about anything. He's written a book, The Music of Life, explaining this. The DNA is like a music score for a symphony. By itself, the music score is dead. To come alive, it needs musicians to interpret the score and perform the music of life.
If you ask the question, what is life? It's one of the most fundamental questions you can ask, one of the deepest metaphysical, religious, and spiritual questions. What is life? It's not a set of molecules. Because, as I said, those molecules on their own do nothing. They're dead. So what is it? What could life possibly be? Well, the other possibility, if it isn't the individual molecules, it must be how they talk to each other, how they interact. In other words, life must be a process. And the origin of my little book is based on taking a rather different metaphor for living systems, and I call it the music of life. And the reason for that is the following. Music also is not just a set of notes. You can find the score of one of Bach's great cantatas or Beethoven's symphony, and you'll see all the notes written there on the music page. But that's not the music. It's only music when some musicians play it. and that is a process. And they give life to those dead notes on the page. So, let's have a look at the metaphor, the music of life. When Oxford University Press, that published this book, were looking for a cover, they came up with this extraordinary image. And you can ask some questions about it. Is it an insect? Might be a butterfly. Or is it a violin? And of course, it's neither or both, depending on how you look at it. And it was actually made by a famous Japanese paper artist, Hideharu Naito. You notice too that although the instrument, if that's what it is being played, there is a bow there, there's no player. The processes of music play themselves. They require a performer, of course, who's good to play, but still they arise from their interactions. They are processes.
Well, I suppose to a Buddhist that could make perfect sense. It reminds me of episode 101, where we came across Fritjof Capra and his Tao of Physics. He likens modern physics to Eastern mysticism. And there's also Angelica's exposition of those mystical explanations of physics in episode 102. Noble could be the Fritjof Capra of biology. But getting away from such mysticism, are we really expected to believe anything even vaguely like a symphony score could appear without a composer? Are we to expect meaningful performances by random chance molecular agencies interpreting such a score? Are we really expected to believe anything even vaguely comparable could happen by Brownian motion of cells jiggling randomly in water? Well, of course, if you're absolutely committed to atheism, like George Wald in episode 12. That leaves us with only one possible conclusion, that life arose as a supernatural creative act of God. I will not accept that philosophically, because I do not want to believe in God. Therefore I choose to believe in that which I know is scientifically impossible: spontaneous generation arising to evolution. I wonder if even George Wald would believe in random jiggling of particles creating anything even remotely comparable to a Beethoven symphony, and a molecular orchestra to play it. When one looks at all the varied and vastly complex mechanisms and processes happening in the miracle we call life, we can perhaps appreciate the fact that not only Descartes, but philosophers and thinkers throughout history have concluded there must be a soul, or a spiritual aspect to our existence. It's only since the rise of secular humanism, in the period misnamed the Enlightenment, that purely materialistic ideas started to become popular. We might ask, why are they popular? With all deceivableness of unrighteousness in them that perish, because they received not the love of the truth, that they might be saved. For this cause God shall send them strong delusion, that they should believe a lie. Thank you for joining me for this episode. If you enjoyed it, please like, subscribe and press the bell so that you'll be notified as I release new movies. If you'd like to support this project, you're welcome to do so through Patreon. Find the link on my channel banner and in the description below.